Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic for you today? Let's do it. What's the scariest thing you have ever witnessed? Please remember to like, share, hype, and subscribe.
2 years ago, about 4 months after I got my driver's license, I hit and killed a man who jumped out in front of my car. I got my license late at 18 because my family couldn't afford it and I had to save up. I was driving to work at the hospital, where I'm a transporter. It was still pretty dark out around 6 a.m. The thing I remember most is the sound of the back of his head hitting my windshield, and then watching him roll off the side. I'd never seen so much blood in my life. I called the police right away. It turned out the man was committing suicide. He had a note in his pocket. Even knowing that, it still really sucked. As an ICU nurse, definitely COVID-19. I remember the day we ran out of body bags. I remember the 18-year-old daughter of the young, strong, healthy police officer who got the okay to bring something into the hospital for her unconscious dad, and then stood at the glass door, talking to him and staring at him for hours, telling him he had to get better. He did not. I remember wheeling a patient up from another floor in her bed because she was also very sick, so she could say goodbye to her husband through the glass door. I remember the 20-something-year-old whose only medical history was childhood asthma and who avidly did not believe in masks, who didn't make it. I mostly remember people holding my hand tight and looking searchingly into my eyes the days before they needed to be intubated, begging me to tell them they were going to survive this. I remember needing to use ungodly amounts of pressure to force air into people's lungs as a last-ditch effort, and sometimes popping their lungs like balloons. I remember feeling so discouraged that we would work so hard to keep people alive for weeks or months, CRRT on almost every patient, and no one would ever come off the vent, except 2 people. Those 2 people had needed so much sedation and paralytics to get enough oxygen that they couldn't move more than their fingers or even nod appropriately after they woke up. And I remember a whole lot more that would probably take a week or longer to verbalize, and something I'm sure I can't share online. Was out on my morning walk when I saw a young teenage girl get out of a taxi outside her school. There was no one else around, and I assumed she was running late, hence the taxi. She was wearing a big jacket with super long sleeves that got caught in the door as she closed it while the taxi was pulling off. Watched her dragged like a rag doll for around 200 meters while I chased the car down, screaming and waving for the driver to stop until he finally spotted me. She luckily hadn't gone under the wheel, but looked like she had been beaten to a pulp when I caught up. Called an ambulance and had to wait for what felt like forever, 5 minutes tops, for them to arrive. She was badly hurt but wasn't killed, and I walked home shaking and in tears after what I had seen. I was visiting a friend and his wife for the weekend. We went out of their apartment for pizza and beer. When we got back, my friend punched the elevator button to take us back to their 10th floor apartment. When the elevator door opened, there was a corpse on the elevator floor with its head blown to pieces. The elevator interior was a bloody mess. We were understandably shocked. We could not react in time, and so the elevator door closed and it went somewhere else. My friend rushed to get the building superintendent. His wife called 911. I tried to get the elevator back so we could hold it on the first floor. The super told my friend he already knew about the dead guy riding the elevator. It seems the super knew the corpse got between a husband and wife fighting. The hubby pulled out a gun and was going to kill his wife. The dead guy stood in the way and got his head blown to pieces. My friend was shocked and angry that the super left the corpse to ride the elevator to scare the hell out of people. It seems the super did not want to get involved. My friend talked about how kids or young women in the building could innocently call the elevator and end up with nightmares for weeks. When the police arrived, it was like a full tactical team. Scary stuff.
Seems like a reasonable response from a building super. Dead body, knows what happened, leaves it there, doesn't want to get involved, leaves the elevator running. It's a pretty bad job, and yeah, you're right, could have traumatized a lot of people. Like you. Sorry.
I work as a maintenance tech for an apartment complex, and while I was out grabbing supplies, a dude I've gotten to know pretty well came running outside his apartment with something in his arms, just absolutely screaming and bawling, completely in shock. I went over to see what was up, and it was his newborn daughter in his arms, completely lifeless, pale and limp, no breath, no pulse. He was frantically trying to figure out what to do, so I told his girlfriend to call 911, as she was pretty deep in shock as well, and had another woman outside. I instructed to stay with her and help her call an ambulance. I was a lifeguard for a bit as a teenager, so I've taken CPR classes for all ages as a requirement, but it had been a good 15 years since that point, but no one else knew how. The guy did not want to let go of his daughter, so I finally got through to him and said, "Look man, this is fucking scary. I get it, but we have to at least try CPR or there's a very real chance she could die." I showed him where to place his hand and how to do light compressions on a baby, along with firmly rubbing their chest to stimulate breathing again. It felt like an eternity, but after about 20 or 30 seconds I saw movement, and sure as shit, the baby started coughing, color came back to her face, and then she started screaming. Let me tell you, I never want to see someone going through that with their child again. I've seen people die, I've seen people dying, but the grief and terror on this guy's face over his potentially dead newborn still haunts me to this day. The adrenaline rush when the kid started breathing again was so fucking intense, I had to sit down after they got in the ambulance. Kid's doing well now, and about 3 or 4 years old, and I still get regularly thanked by mom and dad, but in my eyes I just had to try. I don't understand how so many people could just stand there watching. It was awful. My mum and I were standing in the aisle on a full bus in the Canary Islands. Just the two of us were standing because the driver had assured us that there were still seats available, and then set off before we discovered that there weren't. We were on windy, hilly roads, and the driver was driving like a crazy person, going too fast and repeatedly tailgating another vehicle at high speed to try to bully the car's driver to change lanes and get out of his way. This went on for about 5 minutes as our driver got bolder and drove even closer. The car didn't move as our driver expected, and instead, he had to slam on the brakes to avoid crashing into it. My mum was in her mid-late 70s at the time, and she was already scared before this happened. She had turned sideways, hoping to get a better grip on the handle on one of the seats, and instead went reeling backwards, more than half the length of the bus. The stop was so sharp that I envisioned her flying through the windshield. Her terrified little face looked like Alan Rickman in Die Hard. She put her arms out to try and stop herself and hit them on every seat going by until she eventually hit the floor with the base of her spine, and her shoulders and head slammed back onto the floor. As this is happening, and I'm trying to stumble to reach her, the driver has already set off driving again at about 60 miles an hour. From the sound alone, I honestly expected her to have a cracked her skull and broken at least one arm, but thankfully she was just horribly and painfully bruised all over. The vision of my mum flying away from me helplessly, in what easily could have been her last moments on Earth, haunt me. After all that, I forced the driver to take the entire bus of tourists directly to the hospital because he wouldn't pull over and wait for an ambulance. On the way to the hospital, I had to demand that someone get out of their seat so she could sit down while I checked her over because everyone was just staring at her and not thinking. Was coming home from out in the hills bits of New York, November-December time, and there was just a fine layer of snow on the roads. I already had my snows on and am native to areas that see several feet of snow every year, so I wasn't stressed about it. I'm maybe 3 car lengths behind the car in front of me when he suddenly swerves to the left hard into oncoming traffic lane. As soon as he does, he reveals an SUV coming from the opposite direction that had lost traction and was sliding. We were going up a hill, so the sliding SUV was coming down the hill diagonal into my lane of traffic. I slammed on my brakes and also swerved to the left. His front bumper missed my front bumper by what must have been inches. I remember his expression. We would have slammed head-on into one another, and probably both rolled down the hill I was coming up. He came to a stop several hundred feet behind me, where I also came to a stop, back in my lane of traffic, staring at my rearview mirror from the second he passed me. He was sliding so fast, I thought for sure he was going to roll. God bless he didn't. It was the closest I had ever been to an accident, and I had maybe half a second to react. Had I not braked hard and swerved, we would have definitely collided. We both drove away after collectively shitting our pants for a few moments on the side of the road. Adrenaline took like half an hour to go away. It was a surreal feeling. Two cars collided in an intersection and slamming into a building by a sidewalk where 3 children were just walking, and all 3 are instantly killed. It is when a drunk driver and a red light runner colliding into each other, this is what happens. I could never erase this memory as long as I live, and it happened 40 years ago. I was only 9 and witnessing this from the other side of the street. 40 years later, I still do not feel safe on any sidewalks. People notice how I keep an eye on all the cars coming and going when I go for a walk. Not safe for work, so be warned. It wasn't necessarily the scariest thing I've seen. My first year in private security, we responded to a crash in transit attack, i.e. money van. We arrived on scene and immediately got involved in a shootout between the CIT attackers and other law enforcement components on the scene. A few minutes after arriving, we heard the explosion and realized the CIT van wasn't bombed. After the shootout, when the 3 suspects who were still alive were arrested, we realized that the CIT attackers responsible for handling the explosives accidentally blew himself up. At the end of the day, 5 suspects were killed during the shootout. 1 blew himself up, and 3 suspects were arrested. 1 passed away in the hospital the next day. Last month, my husband was placed on hospice because he was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, and the doctors said that the leukemia cells have come back and there are no more treatment options for him. They said he probably only had a few days left, and they weren't wrong. I had him moved from the hospital he was in to a nursing home close to our home for those final days, so his family and friends could come see him. His last day was the worst. He started coughing and throwing up very large amounts of blood, and it was so scary and heartbreaking at the same time. He did this for hours until we left for the evening, and the nurses got him comfortable enough to sleep. He passed away in his sleep that night. About 6 months ago, after I became an engineer for the railroad company I'm working for now, I was running overnight through some very remote backwoods in the southeastern U.S. One stretch goes across a river we call the Bridge Halfway Bridge. It's a known landmark for us because it marks a halfway point between 2 destinations on that particular line. This night, though, we noticed a flashing light in front of us when we finally came into view of the bridge. It was like it was bobbing up and down away from us. We watched this light as we approached it, trying to figure out what it was. When we came onto the bridge, my conductor said, "Oh my God, that's a couple of kids." Sure enough, there they were, 2 kids running down the tracks over the bridge. I began going through the procedures, trying to stop the train, but it was too late. The bridge was too long and the train was still moving too fast to stop. We lost sight of them over the nose of the train, heard a loud scream, then just the rumble and brakes of the locomotive. When the train finally stopped, my conductor went out to confirm what we knew happened, and when he got back in, was explaining what he could see to dispatch, and he stated there was a large chunk of scalp and hair hung in the coupler and on the front of the locomotive. That night, and the loud scream will live in my brain forever. I was, I guess, about 25 or 26. My Gramps, my cousin's husband, and I were going hunting on my Gramps' friend's property. Gramps was in his truck, and my cousin's husband and I were riding in my car. Now, out in this particular rural area of Texas near Hondo, a lot of properties there don't have road access because they are completely surrounded by other people's property, which was the case here. So we had to drive through other people's property to get to his, access that they are legally required to provide, and it can be very windy, and you can make wrong turns, etc. Well, we made a wrong turn somewhere, and wound up at a dead end with about 6 mobile homes, and one of them, a few folks were hanging out on the porch drinking. We turned around to go back up the way and see where we messed up, and find our way to his friend's property. A minute or so after we're turned around and we're driving back, a 4-wheeler zooms past both of us, cuts off my Gramps' truck, and a dude hops off, pointing a shotgun at my Gramps. Now we're in the middle of BFE, in the middle of the night, with no cell service. We have no context to what's going on or what's being said, and we're both white as ghosts, thinking some backwoods hillbilly is about to shoot my Gramps and probably us and bury our bodies in the woods. After a minute, the dude lowers his gun and chats with my Gramps for a minute, and then my Gramps takes off and we follow him. I asked him after the fact what that was. Apparently, the dude has a problem with poachers and thought he had caught one. After my Gramps explained what was going on, he got directions to where we were going. I was on the metro in DC heading back out to Silver Spring on the Red Line. It was a pretty packed car, and right in front of me, there was an older guy, maybe 50s, hanging onto the bars and a group of younger guys around him. I was holding the bar behind them. I wasn't paying attention to the conversation, but older guy snapped, "I'll knock you on your f***ing ass," and pointed at one of them. It was almost eerie. The lot of them exchanged glances but didn't say anything. We were about 30 seconds from pulling into the next stop, and those guys, 3 or 4 of them, just pounced on him and started beating the shit out of him. I still remember the size of the one guy's fist standing to his direct right, just hit after hit after hit, and I don't think the older guy got stabbed, but one of them hit him with something in his hand. Blood sprayed like crazy. They stopped when the doors opened and bolted. His face looked like he'd gone 3 rounds with Mike Tyson. He mumbled something and pulled out a handkerchief to wipe his face. I can't remember where he got off, but before I did. I've ridden the metro all my life, from infant to 19-year-old girls solo in the city to married adult, and that's the only time I ever felt unsafe. I was a young teen. My family was coming home after a dinner out when we came across a spilled shopping cart filled with cans spilled across an outside area and going into a ditch near our home. We pulled over, and my dad got out to see if someone was hurt. Being the brat I was, who hated my stepmom, still do now, but still wish I'd listened, got out to follow despite my stepmom yelling at me to stay. Ended up being a hit and run, and I ended up basically getting to see my dad calling 911 as he tried to stop the bleeding on the poor homeless man's now stump where he used to have a leg. His leg was splattered and a few feet farther, and I'm also not sure if he even had most of one of his hands. It was a horrific sight for younger me, and not something I've forgotten. Honestly, my dad dying. It happened quick. He was feeling ill, went to the hospital and was fine for the first week with the doctor saying he'd be okay, to having a GI bleed, causing a cardiac event, to being on a vent for a week before dying. My dad had never really been sick my entire life, and there was no long-term sickness that made me expect this. The reason it was scary was being so absolutely powerless. I had to sit there every day, all day, and hope he got better, while I think knowing deep down he would not. Watching the strongest person you know need help and not being able to help is the scariest thing I think I'll ever experience. I was in highway traffic. There was an accident around a bend up ahead. The road was reduced to 1 lane, so it was moving slow. When I rounded the curve and got level with the emergency vehicles, there were 3 closed lanes of traffic and a car with a crumpled front end and shattered windshield in the middle lane. None of that was particularly terrifying. The terrifying thing was the single empty infant-sized car seat sitting in the middle of the road several yards in front of the car with the shattered windshield. There were little evidence flag things everywhere, and tons of cops and firefighters, but no visible medics or EMTs. The accident had clearly happened some time ago. Any injured victims had been taken away. I don't know if there had been a baby in the car seat when it was ejected through the windshield, but I'll never forget the way all the air left my lungs when I saw it sitting there. Urban decay photography kick. Found in rural area, a few old warehouses half collapsed with vines and absolutely gorgeous lighting for photography. I just kind of was roaming this forgotten section of time, saw a bridge with a super old factory half collapsed on the other side. In all my brilliant wisdom and glory, no hesitation, set off on this old metal and pressed wood bridge, equally as forgotten as the rest of the structures I was making my way through. The scariest thing I ever saw was the broken chunk of wood tumbling end over end down 100+ feet. Feels like 500 feet in my memory, but looked it up at some point. Was over, just don't remember how far. Seeing my sneaker dangling over nothing, and how the splash looked, is burned into my brain like it was yesterday. Quick on my feet as soon as it broke, I jumped back. I remember clutching the pendant on my necklace I was wearing and screaming. I sat there and screamed for a few minutes, realizing no one knew where I was. I was 90+ minutes away from where I was living, 1,200+ miles where I was from. I tucked my car on a service road off the sparsely traveled highway that was to this factory warehouse stretch. Abandoned late 80s, if I remember correctly, and it was the first day of a long weekend. There's something terrifying and thrilling about being an adventurous loner. Ran into 2 sketchy dudes stealing copper and said wouldn't call the police if they stayed 50 feet back, and we shouted about the architecture and cool finds at 200 feet away for a while, cracking jokes. Warehouse was cool. I did carry pepper spray, pocket knife, and had a keychain doubled as a makeshift brass knuckle I held the whole time. I was same side of the river, those dudes. Pictures were epic. I would have had a 3+ hour walk to get back to my car had I taken the safer route. My dumb ass screamed and cussed at myself the whole way back to the other side, and I had to sit in my car, deep breathing for like 30 minutes before I drove off again. Absolutely one of my favorite memories, and by far the scariest thing I faced. I guess somewhat mild compared to other comments here since nothing actually happened, but still scarred the shit out of me in the moment. I used to deliver pizza in college, and we got an order around 9 p.m. It was already kind of sketchy part of town. The entire delivery area was really. But I'm driving down a pretty dark road with woods on either side, and I come up on an intersection where the road crossing has a stop sign, but mine doesn't. An SUV, I think a Suburban if memory serves, pulls out into the intersection as I'm coming up and fully stops. The passenger door opens and a guy gets out into the road. At this point I think I'm being robbed, but I'm still trying to brake. Instead of that, the guy walks off along the road the SUV came from, and the SUV goes forward on its way, letting me pass without incident. To this day, I have no idea what that was about. Probably would have been 2018. Part of me wonders if they were trying to ambush someone else before realizing I wasn't who they were looking for, but I don't know. Weird as hell. When I was 10 years old, my parents were fighting because my youngest brother had just been born. My mother was having meltdowns because of all the stress, and my dad wasn't interested in dealing with any of it, so he was going to leave. They both started fighting, which turned into my dad beating on my mother with my younger brother, who was 5 at the time, and he was pulling on my dad's pant leg, screaming, "Don't hurt mommy." Then, mother started yelling for me to go run to the neighbor's house and tell them to call the police. Hearing that, he threw my mother away and ran back into another room before coming back out with a shotgun and put it right up to my head and said, "If you do, I'll blow your fucking brains out." I don't know what to do, what to think. I just stood there like a deer in the headlights. He then slowly backed out of the house and ran to his truck before driving off. We didn't see him again for like 2 weeks. The future. I'm being serious. The fact that the President of the United States is not a president for just a businessman that a bunch of rich people elect him so that we can advance their businesses further in a lot of corrupted people to support this, while this drugs us down, making the future worse for both the United States and everywhere else, considering everybody wants a chunk of money and whatnot. I'm sure that what I'm saying sounds odd, mostly because I'm just jumping through a bunch of stuff that are in my head. Overall, what I'm trying to say is everybody is numb because they have entertainment around there. And if you're okay, nobody helps one another when they really need to. And the ones who do are considered crazy, or they get stopped and shut down. The only way we're fixing any of this is that everybody gathers to fight back. 8 to 10 years old, 2005 to 7-ish. Saw my next door neighbor, 80-year-old man, have a stroke and collapse right in front of my parents' house. I was the first to notice this from the living room window and just froze. My older twin brother, on the other hand, instantly ran outside to check on the old man and yelled for Mom to call 911. Luckily, the old neighbor survived and lived 3 more years. It wasn't the fact I was watching an old man slowly pass away from a stroke and seeing his lifeless body go limp that bothered me. I wasn't scared or confused. I was more bothered by how I just couldn't move myself to do anything in that moment. Like I recognized what was happening in front of me, and I did nothing. Like, why did I freeze in an important moment? I knew what was happening and what was needed to help, and yet my body did nothing. When I studied abroad in Costa Rica, one day I was walking into town, decided to take the scenic route. I noticed a man laying down across the street and decided to check it out. The man reeked of booze and was lying face down in a puddle of blood, like soaked head to toe. I can barely speak Spanish and didn't have a cell phone while abroad, so I frantically chased down a local and tried to explain to them a man needed help down the street. Pretty sure I told the lady a man needs help. He had too much sangria, but it worked out. Left once the ambulance was called. But if you're talking the actual scariest thing, is watching my parents lose my little sister. It's a pain you only know if you live through it. My parents were very different people pre and post my sister dying. You learn at a deep level. Nothing lasts. When I was in prison in 2022, the man who lived across from me in the dorm was approached by 2 other men, and they started brutally stabbing him with metal can lids they sharpened into weapons. He tried to fight back but couldn't. Seemed like it went on forever, but was probably only a minute or so. COs came and sprayed everyone, and I've never seen so much blood in person. It was leaking out of him everywhere. Lifelight came and landed in the yard and took him away. Not sure if he lived or not, never saw him again. Then the day went on like it never even happened. Prison is a crazy place. I told myself I'll never go back again. I was doing my student teaching on 9/11. A couple weeks later, a kid brought a gun to school and was shouting threats at all the teachers across the hall. The next semester, I was subbing at a middle school, and some kids turned on the propane burner in the science lab to try to light it with a lighter. A month or so later, a middle school kid threatened me and 3 other kids with a knife. I left that school district shortly after. After my current district, a group of 5th graders, 2 of whom I've known since they were in kinder, made a detailed plan to shoot up the school, including a job list and a plan on how to hide the bodies so no one would realize what was going on. Less murder spree, more serial killer slow burn. Last week, a patient blocked the door during dismissal and shouted threats at another parent, all in front of about 20 terrified children. I was 19 and at a 420 rally in Denver. This was just after weed was legalized there, so we were all having a grand time. Heavy police presence, but basically the cops just surrounded the rally and let us get on with our smoke. Only made movies if someone was belligerent trying to leave the area. This was just a few days after the Boston bombing, so people were certainly on edge. I'd say even before the bombing, people were cautious in large gatherings in Colorado. I don't know why, but it's like a magnet for mass attacks. Anyway, 420 comes and goes, as does the massive cloud of smoke we all produced when the clock struck weed o'clock. About a half hour later, it's still hazy and hell, and everyone in the park was absolutely zooted. Mind you, this is a festival-style event, so there's music being blasted from multiple directions. I remember gazing at the sky, thinking about how crazy it is to be in a crowd of literally thousands of stoned people. I was trying to differentiate the music from the different stages when I heard this very classic pop pop pop. I think, no fucking way. This is a peaceful rally, it's just stoners. It must just be in the song. Then I saw them, the wave of people, stoned, confused, terrified people coming at me. It took a second to register that no one would be running if it was just a song. Someone was shooting, and they had to be in front of me because that's where the wave was coming from. It wasn't even the gunshots that scared me the most, it was the people. Thousands of people stoned out of their mind, running at me. I wasn't scared of being shot. I was scared of the crush. Thankfully, after the first few people stumbled over us, I managed to pull my friend from behind me and into a hospitality tent sturdy enough that the crowd had to go around. Eventually, we had to join the throng of people running, but by then the shooting had stopped and the crowd had thinned. So anyway, to answer the question, the scariest thing I've ever seen is thousands of people absolutely out of their minds, high, sprinting at me and my equally high friends.